Welcome to the Future of Beef Show, produced in partnership with Drovers and Breeder. This is the #1 podcast for progressive ranchers and feeders looking to run smarter, more profitable, next-generation operations. I'm your host, Jim Johnson, from the Brands and Barbed Wire podcast. I'm joined today by Dr. Jessica Sperber, PhD in feedlot nutrition, and Ian Wheal, founder of Breeder, a cattle tech company helping producers raise, track, and trade high-performing cattle. Today, we're joined by Dr. Vaughn Holder, Global Beef Research Director of Alltech, where he works at the intersection of agriculture, research, and innovation, and how systems thinking drives Alltech's philosophy. This episode is sponsored by Corteva Agriscience. When weeds and brush get in the way, you'll find the solution at rangeandpasture.com. So welcome back to the Future of Beef Show. Our guest today is Vaughn Holder. Vaughn, welcome to the Future of Beef Show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. Ian, let's tell us a little bit about Vaughn.
Well, look, it's very exciting to have Vaughn on here. I've been following him for a number of years, and I think when we first started Breeder and we're thinking about how do you tell the beef story, I think Vaughn's been an amazing advocate for this industry in terms of telling the story of beef, doing from an environmental perspective, from a nutrition perspective, and the work he's done at Alltech and all of that has been just phenomenal. So I know with new food pyramids and everything else, there's going to be a lot of topics to cover today. So we're very excited to have you on, Vaughn, and yeah, thanks for joining.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, so Vaughn, for the folks that don't know you, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and maybe where you're from, because it doesn't sound like a Texas accent.
No, I'm from Kentucky. That's the. I still do have an accent. I have been living in Kentucky for 21 years, but I guess apparently I don't sound South African anymore, but I certainly don't sound Kentucky. So, yeah, originally South African resident, born and raised in South Africa. Did my undergraduate in animal science at University of Pretoria over there. And Dr. Lyons, the founder of Alltech, Dr. Lyons Sr., actually came through a lecture tour to our university and had asked my major professor at the time, to send 2 students over to Kentucky for internships. And that was 21 years ago that I came across to the States for an internship and essentially never left, was sponsored student through Alltech through my master's and PhD programs and carried on with Alltech after that. So training at University of Kentucky, beef nutrition, primarily physiology, metabolism, and started on with Alltech probably in earnest as a professional in 2012. And so held various roles from tech support to leading right now the beef research for Alltech on a global basis. So,
now, did you come from a beef background in South Africa?
Interestingly, not even an ag background.
Okay.
I think the story with a lot of people sounds familiar. As I started off thinking I wanted to become a veterinarian and toured a vet school. Didn't like what I saw, honestly. Didn't like the idea of always just dealing with sick animals all the time, and took an undergraduate course in ruminant nutrition, and that was it. I knew almost immediately, and understanding the rumen was a world within a world.
The volatile fatty acids were just very attractive to him.
You make it sound funny, but yes. this whole universe that lives inside an animal was just completely fascinating to me, and how much we as a society relied on that microcosm that's on the inside of a cow was really attractive. I always knew I wanted to be in research of some sort, and that was just what I fixated on.
Yeah, great. So what do you do with Alltech now, and what's I guess a day in the life of Vaughn Holder look like?
Yeah, so I'm in the research group, but I'm not a person who's sitting in the lab day to day, and in fact people probably get suspicious of me if I'm in the lab, which happens from time to time when I might have a little bit of a crazy idea that I want to test out. But I'm, for the most part, a research manager, which means I'm looking at problems that we as an industry have or we as a company have, and I'm trying to find places to find those solutions, whether that's the development of a new technology, a new service, or finding people to look at something we already have and finding someone who has the expertise in that area to be able to do that research. That's essentially my role, is just directing the research program and matching up skills with problems.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Alltech as a company. What does Alltech do and some of those things, because I think some of our viewers might not know or be familiar with them.
They're probably buying Alltech product, they just don't know they're buying Alltech.
I think that's a lot. That happens in a lot of cases. Yeah, it's one of those cases where some of our brands are perhaps better better known than the parent company themselves. But we're a biotechnology company, founded by Dr. Lyons Sr., who was an early immigrant from Ireland, came across to Kentucky and started Alltech. And it was started as a company that created natural solutions for the problems that agriculture faced, or not even necessarily problems, but natural technologies that integrate into agricultural systems. Essentially, it started off with yeast culture. We were one of the first people to bring yeast culture to the US market, and it just bloomed from there. The natural path that you take when you're in an R&D unit, looking at very much an R&D based company, I should say. Dr. Lyons was a scientist himself, hence the Dr. Lyons. And everything we do is sort of stems from R&D and goes naturally to the places where we need it to serve the industry. So ended up having an extremely large portfolio for a company of our type. I think most companies like Alltech have a specialty area like yeast or like trace minerals or enzymes or whatever it might be. We're in all of those places. In some cases, it makes things difficult for especially scientists because you can't specialize in all of those areas simultaneously, or you have to find people that do specialize in all of those areas simultaneously. But it also gives us a much broader look on essentially systems-based, ecosystem-based view of agriculture rather than just zooming in on one specific part and saying, we want to fix that, but we don't actually know what that means for the rest of the system, which is what we do for the most part as an industry. We specialize so deeply that we don't know. I'll give you an example. The recent methane craze that we've been through and all survived was a myopic view just at methane or methane, depending on where you live. And let's reduce this, the bad guy, without any sense of what that's going to do to the rest of the system. And I think that's an example of what we see across agriculture, across all technologies, is that we don't look at it in a very broad view and say, what are the knock-on effects to the entire system when we change things? So that was always the view. I think it's become a lot more deliberate with all of the sustainability pressure and now relief of that pressure that's come on our industry, but it has certainly just reaffirmed that we are looking at this in the right way from a systems view rather than really zoomed in and looking at single problems.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that's when I first ran into you, is I obviously doing a lot of that research, when I call it peak vegan, when it was like everyone was against methane.
Yeah.
And it was, but, when you started thinking about that and, all the work and research that you guys did, like, it sort of highlighted to me like how Alltech approaches stuff. Like, you really do approach it with like the industry first, what you can do for systems. When you look at the challenges that are now coming up, what are you thinking about from your challenges now, or, and how do you think about working and collaborating with people through those sort of cycles as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I think that what we tend to do as an industry is we get forced into some of these areas and say, you need to look at this now.
Yeah.
And then we all chase down that rabbit hole and say, what can we do in this place? The research cycle that is required to develop new things, even new ways of feeding animals, new genetic lines, new whatever it might be, to approach some of these topics is slower than the topics are changing, at the rate at which the topics are changing, right? So those topics are cycling over, and we're 3 years behind in R&D, especially in beef. The other models are much quicker to turn over and respond to these things, but in beef we don't have that option. So we are always behind that innovation timeline, and if we chase that, we're dead. Yep. So I think you need to have a set of core principles that probably will serve all of these fads, if you want to call them that will come through, that can address those things, but without compromising what we know to be appropriate for agriculture, because we know agriculture better than the people that are crying out louder than everyone else. And so I think going back to methane, it was always our philosophy that we needed to address sustainability through efficiency. And we said that from the start, even when we bought into the marketplace, purchasing the Agilent company. Yep. It was all about enhancing efficiency to have knock-on benefits for methane. Because if you're going to compromise performance on the systems level, that's always going to be bad. You may knock down that methane, you might get given a credit for it or not given a credit for it, but at the end of the day, if you're reducing the efficiency of the system, that's bad for everybody. And it's bad for all the metrics. Bad for profitability. all of those things that fit under the sustainability thing that we don't think about.
We know the best in the beef industry watch this show, so we want to hear from you. We'll pick one listener to win this exclusive Future of Beef Yeti cooler. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram, send us your guest ideas, or just drop us a message. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So I appreciate that. Obviously, as a ruminant nutritionist myself, I like having Vaughn on here. We can talk about science. And so, Vaughn, we all chased the methane for a while. We had to, right?
Yep.
And I think that we've learned more about the rumen microbiome and feed efficiency and the importance of maybe even selecting cattle for feed efficiency traits, right? The biggest challenge with that is that cattle out on pasture, we have no idea how much they eat. Their dry matter intake is not available for us. So just on a very basic, broad level, let's talk about rumen health and like where you see the rumen space changing over the next couple of years, or what Alltech is working on right now. What's the most important to you? And from where your ruminant nutrition hat, what are the most critical things right now for beef cattle?
Yeah, I think the nice thing about it's always a double-edged sword. I think that a lot of us resisted this whole methane idea, but there was a lot of money thrown at understanding rumen function and how we can manipulate rumen function. And we've learned a lot through going down this road that we don't necessarily are going to use in the methane space. So modifying the way that the rumen operates has been something everyone's been looking at really closely to try and understand the flow of hydrogen, the flow of carbon, and where things are going. And so to answer your question directly, we've learned a lot in trying to inhibit methane that we can use in other places in agriculture that may not have anything to do with methane. But manipulating rumen function, manipulating that microbiome, which we still have very, very limited understanding of how it works. And any nutritionist that says they know how the rumen microbiome works is not worth bringing on your show, I would say, because we don't. It's too complex. We don't have even AI models that can even come close to trying to predict what the rumen will do, or one rumen versus the other will do with a certain technology. But you can look at these pathways, these chemical pathways, which are a little bit more predictable, and start to understand how you can manipulate some of those. So we have several irons in the fire of manipulating rumen function to manipulate efficiency, to bring about specific conditions in the rumen, whether we're looking at acidosis, the formation of toxins from E. coli, these types of pathways. A lot in the essential oil space, which we weren't actually in before, and we never really got into the essential oil space in earnest because it was so wishy-washy. The use of essential oils, which are very much undefined mixtures of oils that come out of plants, it was never very technical science that was put into the essential oil space. But there are things there that are very, very interesting. And most of what we've learned about Agilent, at least on the beef side, is going to be put towards technologies that improve performance and feed efficiency. So that's a really interesting area for us. We're a couple of years out on that yet, bringing something to commercial reality now. But that's really, really exciting areas, essential oils. Still, probiotics is still a really good area. Again, we know this much about how probiotics affect the rumen. Yeast cultures are well studied. There's a couple of bacterial species that are well studied, but we have millions of organisms that we can put through that system. And so we put a lot of effort into having laboratory models that can model some of this stuff, that we can actually get some high throughput screening of probiotic technologies, whether those are fungal based, whether those are bacterial based, or even viral based technologies that we can then put through a screening process to actually get some high throughput. Because we can't, again, with the long life cycle of beef production, we cannot design a probiotic, test it on a herd of animals, even if it's a feedlot feeding cycle. It's still
215 days on feed.
Yeah, even a short cycle, 180 days or whatever it is.
Yeah.
You can't do research that way. You will bankrupt yourself so fast and be irrelevant very quickly. So we put a lot of work into putting together models that we can then use to screen technologies that we take further. And then we take them to a university or whoever it might be once we've decided we have something that's worth looking at.
So does that mean, there's been a lot of progress like on growth promoters and stuff in commercial beef cattle, but when we look at like some of the all natural and HTC supply chains, like is there going to be some technologies we can use there in future to help it catch up with where commercial beef is going? Is that what was that how we'd relate this back for producers?
Yeah, the difficulty in that space is that because it is such a small segment of the industry, particularly in the US, which is the
Very
most
small.
valuable market for everybody, you're just not going to get the commitment from a resource standpoint to chase technologies in that space.
It's just not enough return.
There's just the market's not big enough, or the alternative market is just that much bigger that you would rather be looking at those types of opportunities. And the chemical side, it is also, you have less rules, right? I don't want to say that loosely because the rules are different on the farmer side and often harder, but the set of things you can start with are much, much greater. Your funnel is much wider at the front end. But the way that we see it, we are not trying to chase that market either. Our stuff should work in both. And that has always been Dr. Lyons' philosophy and is still Mark Lyons' philosophy leading the company, is that our technologies need to work in both places. Otherwise, they're not relevant. We want to design things that will work in all of those programs and design them for the right reasons, moving them into those. So for us, it's not irrelevant, but we need to be able to fit our stuff into both of those markets or we are dead as well.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. And it's when I think about, just all of the changes, like we do a lot on beef on dairy as well. And like, when you start thinking about the things that are happening within the calf rumen development and stuff like that, like that's a whole nother area. And that's where a lot of things have driven things like liver abscess and leaky gut and all of that. And, there still seems to be so much there that can be done as we move forward. And have you done much on the beef on dairy side as well?
Yeah, we've done a little bit. And when I say a little bit, it's something that we're really interested in, but we also have to remember that as much as that has grown, it's still a very
20%
small
of the industry.
Yeah, we still have 90 million beef cows out there that are sitting in the pastures, and we can't ignore those from a systems-based standpoint. I think there's been a lot of resources thrown at that stuff, and we've come a long way just in understanding both on the genetic side and perhaps a little less on the way that we feed those animals, how we can keep those animals together through a production cycle, So we've done some, but again, the stuff that we've done is directly applicable to a receiving animal model or whatever it might be. We always make sure that will overlap with a mainstream part of the industry.
I want to switch gears. I'm going to let you guys keep going on rumen nutrition.
No, I just wonder, you mentioned genetics. How much do you look at that in combination with some of the research you're doing?
Very little.
Okay.
And when I say that, I don't say that lightly. We try to work sort of more at a physiological level to things that would be common between different types of animals. Now, when you have genetics determining where an animal goes to in a production system, that's a little bit different, right? So you might have, tropical environments where you're feeding cattle and you're going to have a different genetic line going to that. So you would do the R&D on cattle in tropical environments and their challenges on that animal model. So it's not necessarily that we're looking at specific genetics and how they interact with nutrition, but we would be looking at animal models and making sure that the research that we do is applicable to the animals that the intended product is going to end up with.
Ever wondered if you could be getting more out of your cattle?
Breeder is the first technology company that's able to track and optimize cattle from conception all the way to the rail.
This puts the power of data into the hands of the rancher and enables them to improve their profit line quicker than they ever have before.
My decision to partner with Breeder was made largely after seeing a demo where I realized what Breeder's doing is unlike anyone else in our industry. Connecting the data from the packing plant back to the feedlot, the stocker backgrounders, and the cow-calf, even connecting that data to the purebred breeder, will just open the door to improvement at a scale and a speed that we have never seen in this industry before.
I believe Breeder's putting ranchers in the driver's seat. We can make breeding decisions based on large amounts of data very quickly. The calves that are produced, they have a higher cutout value, their ribeyes are more profitable, and it plays back to us.
As I'm out around the country, people are asking me about Breeder, and I always recommend Breeder. It's the tool for the future.
Head to breeder.co and book a demo with the team today.
I get this question a lot because we talk about nutrigenomics and the interaction of nutrition with gene expression. That's more at the base genome level, like we're talking about core shared genomics between all cattle, for example, and it's not breed-specific responses that we're looking for.
There's a team of researchers at the University of Nebraska that are doing a large USDA NEFA grant right now on capturing methane. Essentially, it's marrying genetics, management, feed efficiency. So we're individually feeding all those heifers. There's a couple 500 heifers that will go through on this project, and we collect full information on them: nutrient mass balance, gas loss, methane, you name it, we're measuring it, or UNL is measuring it. And that will be some of the first information that marries. Is there a feed efficiency test to make sure that we're not hindering performance on cattle that are either low or higher methane producers? What's interesting is right now we're seeing somewhere in the middle is that where that sweet spot is. So should we be genetically selecting cattle that are low or high methane producers, or like where are we at, right? And so we just finished year 1, moving into year 2 on that. So it's a 5-year project. So pretty big, but yeah, geneticists and nutritionists and all the like. And then doing an exact match model of that in the dairy business as well. So Dr. Paul Koninoff is working on that. So it'll be a big project, but kind of trying to bring all of GEMS together in one study and figure out exactly what is going on. And
that to me is one of the most positive things that has come from this pressure that the whole sustainability methane space has put on the industry. Is it's forced us to think that way, almost defensively, to be honest. We were forced to think that way defensively, to say what are the knock-on effects of what you're proposing. But in forcing us to think that way, it's changed the way that we look at these systems, which is going to be really beneficial to all parts of the system that participate in this. Understanding what you do on your operation and how that affects what happens subsequently, or what you do to the animal and how that affects the animal's environment, the grazing conditions, all of those types of things.
The soil, like the amount of times people think about soil now within a beef cattle mix is, and
we realize how little we know about it.
Yeah.
So Vaughn, Alltech has been on a bit of a road show with a pretty popular documentary. Let's talk about World Without Cows. What was the reasoning behind putting that documentary together, and what has been the feedback from both producers but maybe consumers that have watched it?
Yeah, so this was, I'm going to have to get my timing right, but it's been a few years now that I think we were always in this space, and we knew that the industry needed a voice against essentially calls for eliminating cows as a production-based animal, or ruminants in general, right? Cows got the big end of the stick, but I think the calls were for ruminants in general to be eliminated from production systems because of methane, primarily. That was the flavor of the day on why we should get rid of cows. And of course, at the time, with that myopic view, which we now know is really myopic, but you had a lot of companies coming up with alternatives to meat, milk, these types of products. And it was actually a Super Bowl ad that set it off. So there was a Super Bowl ad, I can't recall which year it was, but it was for a popular oat beverage, or I'm not sure how popular it is, but an oat beverage. And all it was their CEO on a piano in the middle of an oat field singing, "Oh wow, no cow."
Oh.
And that was a Super Bowl ad. Awful ad, but it really got to Mark Lyons, our CEO of the company, and he called up a couple of our in-house journalists and me a couple of days later after seeing that ad and said, we need to put out a story that we need to put out something that addresses the misconceptions that there are about ruminant animal production. Because by that time we were already talking about system-based agriculture, and that, methane that is created here goes into the system and is degraded in the environment. And Frank Mitloehner's story about hydroxyl oxidation and upcycling, all of these concepts that go around that are not even considered when we're saying cows are making methane.
Well, I think I saw one where it was like the water that cows use, and they were measuring all rain that had landed on the land over the last 10 years. And you're just like, hang on a second.
Yeah, so, and again, also saying on a per watt basis, right? Because this was, we're never considering on a per food basis or whatever it might be, or it's on a per calorie basis.
Yeah.
And they're comparing corn with beef and saying this is methane production on a per calorie basis. Do we need calories? I'd venture to say we don't need calories. So that's how it started. Dr. Lyons saw this ad. called up a couple of people and said, let's think about putting together a documentary of some sort, that because they're proposing we have no cows. Okay, let's honestly ask that question. What will happen if we get rid of cows? And so he gave the two journalists that he put on this project, completely removed them from their day-to-day activities. These are two actual journalists that were working for us, and put them full-time on this project. And they had to go out and find people who were in positions of authority or in the sciences that addressed this question. And both sides of the story were addressed. Probably more so on the technical agricultural side, because we're the people that understand these systems. But there were some antagonists as well in the story from the vegan standpoint, saying why we should get rid of cows. And it really was a open and honest documentary. If you've seen it, we were very transparent about what we spoke about. What does it mean for cultures and local economies if we get rid of cows? What does it mean for food security? What does it mean for sustainability? What does it mean for the environment? These types of questions that were addressed, and also economies, right? We looked pretty closely at what it will do to the global economy if we got rid of cows. And the consensus from the story is really bad things will happen if we get rid of cows, because at the very base of it, we rely on them for food, and they take things that we can't eat and turn them into things that we can eat. And that's the basis for like everything else that we pack on top of that story.
The one bit that stuck with me is that you have this bit through it where you're like, if you have a corn plant, you just feed corn to humans, and obviously the humans only eat the kernel, and that's it, that goes with it. But if you fed that same corn plant to cows and then ate the cows, it's going to be a lot. You could feed that person for a lot longer through the upcycling, because the cow eats the whole plant, produces nutrition. Like, it was very well done. And I know there's I'm obviously very pro the beef industry and like what it can do for the environment and what it can do for communities and everything. But it was great to see you taking both sides and trying to take both sides, because that's honestly what most of those other films never did. Like, they didn't even look at it. And I think it was pretty impressive. And I don't think we even said the name. The documentary is called World Without Cows. And so if you ever get a chance to watch it, I know you're still doing screenings and stuff like that, but it's very, very good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been pretty well received. And I guess to answer the other half of your question, I think undoubtedly people within the industry really appreciate their story being told a bit. People are always really worried about it when you tell them that that's the name of the documentary, as if we're proposing that we should have a world without cows. But that's deliberate, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to bring people in. As much as we want this to be a documentary for the industry, it is also just as much designed as an outreach piece to the general consumer, to say, this is what the story actually is. We didn't sugarcoat anything. We talk about the fact that what methane is actually doing in the environment as well. And it's more of let's have a conversation, because we can't say this in 2-minute video clips. Like, this is the problem, is it's a really, really concise message. Hey, cows make methane. We know methane causes global warming. Therefore, cows are bad. And we just don't have that simple message. So this was an attempt to get at a little bit more accessible information. And we've built an entire website around it as well, to where people can say, where can I go for reliable information on what cows are actually doing? And then we have a website that will have all of the different areas.
Yeah, and it's the nutrient density. And like, you look at, I know there's been other work done on like anemia around the world and everything else. And, it does lead into, and you start to really talk about human nutrition in there. We've just had a inverse food pyramid. So, it'd be interesting to get your take on that. I mean, it's very recent. I've just found out it's now the same as the Canadian one. So it's not as big news as we thought it was, but it's, it'd be good to get your perspective on that and the changes and, why the science backs some of this up.
It may not be big news, but it's a big deal for us.
Deal.
This is something I think that's been a long time coming, and it certainly, what they've done is going to make big changes, both for the population health that we have in general, but also to our industry, right? We're going from being essentially vilified by the food pyramid. Now, people's opinions have to change as well, right? This doesn't affect how you shop or how I shop, but it does affect school lunches, these type federal programs, these types of things, but also is the basis for all the policy decisions that get made around nutrition and support for research and all of these things. So really, really important step that has now put animal products as the basis of the pyramid, animal products and vegetables, essentially, which is how we know the ancestral diet of humans actually looks like. Funny how we didn't have maize crops and barley crops and wheat crops when we evolved. So that just makes the most sense, right? Just from a understanding how we evolved standpoint and what our natural diet looks like, but also the research supports it. Mm-hmm. Even the story on saturated fat, you will get a lot of pushback on the saturated fat area because they will say saturated fat is associated with increased LDL and that causes heart disease. But the research doesn't actually say that. There's no direct evidence that saturated fat and causes heart disease, especially saturated fat from beef. Mm-hmm. They don't even classify it. That's like calling linoleic acid equivalent of DHA, unsaturated fat. These are very, very different molecules that we're talking about. And to just put blankets on things and saying saturated fat causes heart disease because of a study that showed that saturated fat elevated LDL. It's just very
even that study was in the 50s or something, wasn't it? And it was like,
and some of them were smokers, and some were they.
And it wasn't even a randomly controlled trial. It was a survey.
The dietary intake was drastically different across all the consumers.
There are randomly controlled trials that have fed saturated fat to people and shown no link to heart disease. So there is hard data that rules that out, essentially. So it's a bit of a return to sanity, in my opinion, against a lot of industry groups that perhaps wouldn't have wanted to see that happen. There's a big force behind having grain as the basis for.
Because it's cheap
for those,
and they can process it and add sugar, and off you go.
But we are not in that space anymore, right? I mean, I understand why that happened originally is because we could grow a lot of grain and we had to make grain the basis of our diet because that was important for America working as a country, especially through wars and those types of things.
It was calories post-World War II. Right?
And that was what we needed. But right now, it's now been updated to what we need more of, and that is more nutrient-dense foods, more protein-dense foods, more vitamin, micronutrient-dense foods, which is why that is now at the basis of the pyramid, and grains are at the top. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really good. As far as effects on our industry, I think it'll be a slow trickle at first. I don't think we're going to see huge changes at first in the industry, but prioritizing animal protein is necessarily going to be good for our industry. Mm-hmm. I think at the end of the day, we don't compete for raw materials as much as some of the other parts of our industry do, so we're going to have an outsized benefit from this, being able to convert plant-based foods that we can't use into high-quality meat.
It's interesting. I mean, you do stuff on a global level. Do you see it? Like America's probably, now I've found out Canada was leading the way, but, America and Canada leading the way on this. Do you think we see some of this trickle through into other countries as well? Because, you go to Europe and there's not that mentality at this stage to stick beef at the top of the food pyramid,
Yeah.
Where do you think it goes?
Yeah, I think to answer your question in maybe two different ways, I think it is going to trickle down. Yeah. I don't think Europe is going to be the first taker on that. They are, again, as we were, kind of entrenched in their policies, and once we stick our flag in the sand, we want to stand next to that flag, whether it's in the right place or not. So I think there's going to be a bit of that, especially with Europe. They've made some pretty big changes away from perhaps rational agriculture practices. So I don't think they're going to be the first takers, but there are a lot of countries that look at the States and look at what we're doing.
Canada.
And Canada. Yeah. Well, with all respect to Canadians, I just think that from a global perspective,
US
is going to be seen as an influencer, whether that's in a positive light or a negative light. I just think that we're sort of a bellwether for some of that stuff. So I think that when we see the benefits of the policy is when that's going to switch, right? And that's going to take a few years. I think it's going to come out as reduced childhood obesity rates. It's going to come out as
reduced diabetes,
these types of things. But these are going to take years.
Years.
So I think when that starts to happen, when these studies start coming out and saying this is what's actually happening to population health as a consequence of these changes, then people are going to go, absolutely.
Well, and a couple of weeks ago, the dairy industry also had a win, right, on getting whole milk approved to be back on the menu in schools. So, I think from protecting our next generation and offering them very nutrient-dense foods that we know are going to help with their brain health and physical activity and all of that is, I think it's just an absolute win with putting protein, animal-based protein back in the center of the plate and pairing that with high-dense foods.
And
nutrient-dense
as
foods.
much as I love beef and as much as I love animal protein, I think the biggest benefit of that is what's being pushed off the plate. Because we know that you can look at school meals in the US and just, these are things that are fully compliant to the previous food pyramid, and this is junk food.
Yeah.
That
It's highly processed.
It's highly
A
processed.
granola bar for breakfast.
Well,
kind
but
of thing.
also
Yeah.
because they're school lunches and because they are publicly funded, it's all the cheapest of everything that goes into that as well. So it is highly processed, highly stable, packed with additives that keep it it's all of the stuff that you don't want to be pushing through children when they're growing. And I think what's being pushed off the plate by the protein and the veggies is more important, honestly, than what we're putting back on, even though that's critically important.
Yeah, that's really good.
There's nothing greater than seeing your cattle grazing on lush green pasture.
Oh yeah, and nothing ruins that view like weeds and brush soaking up all the moisture and nutrients. Regardless of precipitation, we have to take care of our pastures. It doesn't rain grass.
The passion for cattle ranching starts early. So should the protection. Let's keep our pastures in good hands with Corteva Agriscience. To learn more, visit rangeandpasture.com.
Improved cattle feed rations? Check. Reliable domestic sourcing? Check. Maximizing your return on investment? Check. Whole cottonseed checks all the boxes when it comes to beef cattle diets. As an effective source of fat, fiber, and protein, you can build muscle and increase carcass quality with no adverse effects on animal performance. All hat, all cattle. Want to check some more boxes? Track market prices, find suppliers, and more at wholecottonseed.com.
So on the back of like the change the food pyramid, on the back of like what now the methane cycle and what we've learned out of that, like where do we need to be thinking about like looking around the next corner? Right? So, the methane one came at us pretty hard, pretty strong, and everyone suddenly got defensive, and now we've worked out that actually the cow's a big part of society and what it can do. Like, what are you thinking about? Like, you must be sitting there thinking about the vision of what you need to do next. Like, so where do you think we are going next, and what are the innovations that we're going to have to do, and what are the things we might have to help prove or defend? Is it around human nutrition, or where do you think you're going next?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mentioned how delving into this methane space kind of opened up a lot of other thought processes for us. So it's a little bit of chasing down some of those. I think, again, our core, we don't chase these fads. So there's going to be something that comes up over the next year. My guess is it's probably going to be nitrogen on the ruminant side and things we can do about nitrogen. I think that's actually a much more legitimate topic for us to be chasing than methane is. So I expect to see some things come through on nitrogen. So we're certainly thinking about nitrogen efficiency and what we can do in that space.
Does ammonia come into that as well?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Because that's the thing we're seeing in Ireland.
Essentially, yeah. So the ammonia is just a consequence of that buildup of that nitrogen in the system and ruminants are designed to have poor nitrogen efficiency. Mm-hmm. So this is one where we're going to be fighting evolution a little bit, as methane was as well, right? Methane is there for a really specific reason in a rumen fermentation, and so is excess nitrogen and excess nitrogen excretion that comes along with it. So I think that one's going to be an interesting challenge and something that we're going to probably more legitimately have to push together on as an industry, because this is a pretty finely tuned system by evolution that we're going to have to try and perturb. So that's going to be an interesting one. And then I'm going to reiterate the system-based agriculture and understanding what interventions that we do at the cow level are doing to soil, to plants, to essentially ecosystems where the cow is in. We don't have to talk about, we did it in the name of sustainability before, but the understanding is the same. We need to understand how to make these systems more efficient. Because I think we push so hard on a cow, measuring what goes in and what comes out. That's ruminant nutrition all day and night. We probably both did that during our PhDs. But understanding what happens past that, because we have very limited understanding of what actually happens in the ecosystem after that. And there's lots of room for improvement. We've already seen that even changing the form of a trace mineral can affect the growth rate of pastures. that the animals are sitting on. So things like that are going to make much more outsized contributions to our progress, I think, than trying to dial in feed efficiency by another point or whatever it might be. Those are all also important, but I think we're going to make more progress by looking at some of these
Big
knock-on
picture.
effects.
Yeah, systems.
Yeah. And I think the soil one's a really interesting one because there's been a lot of research done at feed yards and feeding level and all of that sort of stuff. But like the micronutrients in the soil, does that go into the plant? Like the same we're talking about for human nutrition. Like how do we produce the micronutrients in the soil that can go into the cow to be able to feed the humans? So it's like, yeah, that whole soil cycle. And I know, look, regenerative is the buzzword. If you ask my dad when he was alive, he'd be like, been doing that for 60 years. Like, you know, but where do you see that side? Like, that's a bit of a fad in terms of chasing, but there's some really, really, really positive things, I think, around how it's making us think about soil.
Yeah, but again, that overarching concept of efficiency is just laced into that. So that's how you kind of know. That's kind of my litmus test for that is to say, what does this do for the efficiency of the system? And that nutrient buildup in the soil is, in my view, perhaps more on the negative side. So I think that there are potentially negative consequences of excess nutrients going into the soil.
Interesting.
You talk about uptake through plants and entry into animals. I think that's relatively well studied, but the consequence of nutrient buildup in soils is not as well studied. So trying to understand whether it's remediation or whether it's changing what or how we feed animals to either reduce that load or to improve the biological response of the soil, which is what we're looking at currently with trace minerals, is if we feed animals this certain form of trace minerals, what does that do to the biology of the soil and therefore to plant growth and subsequently animal performance?
Yeah, I think that's all interesting. I think, you know, as a cow-calf type producer, I think as we look into the future of beef production, that system has got to get more efficient for cow-calf guys to remain profitable, right?
Yep.
I mean, we know and understand a lot in the feeding system, but that cow-calf deal is, you know, there's still lots of opportunity there, I think.
Lots of opportunity and lots of challenge. It's something that is probably from Alltech's perspective, the most important segment, because that's where all our customers are through our feed companies. That is primarily, we do work in feedlots and we do a lot of work with feedlots, but in terms of just animal numbers, we are far more cow-calf serving company with our technology than, even though you might not know it's in there. But that is a really difficult group of people to get your arms around, right? What is the average herd size of a cow? 40. So, and in Kentucky, it's probably half that, and in a lot of places. So you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of producers that you have no good way of reaching, even if you have something that's revolutionary to them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so that remains a challenge. That's part of the reason why we went into feed as a biotech company, which is really unusual. I don't think anyone else has tried to do that. But that was the only way to get technology to that part of the industry, is you had to essentially buy the footprint to access those customers. And so having done that, and as we continue to do that, we are accessing those systems. We're able to actually influence those systems, maybe get some management intervention into those systems that we wouldn't normally have on those sites, and distribution of information as well. So a frustration, I'll think, with a lot of cow-calf researchers is they do that work and they have no one to give it to when they're done. You know, it goes into a scientific publication and it gets filed and you get your name on it. It's great. One more publication on the list, but if no one ever uses it, then what's the point? So accessing those people is the most important part, and it is so diverse. I mean, not just from a genetics, management, everything standpoint is extremely diverse. So that's a challenge. The extension system perhaps doesn't work as well as it used to, for mostly just because of funding. Than anything else. So that was always a really good mechanism that the US had that a lot of other places never had. And I think bringing back that in some sort of capacity would be useful as well, to distribute that information that's coming out of the universities to the people that actually need it.
I mean, that's one of the most amazing things here is that extension. Like you go to, we're in the UK. UK was when we first started Breeder, like they do a lot of really good research, but getting it to a producer to be commercialized, like
in a form that they're going to want
that
to
they
use
can
it, right?
digest it. That's practical.
Can't drop off a
With
paper.
actionables.
With
That's what I'm always, there's got to be an actionable in there for them. You have to tell them the actionable or they're not going to go and do it.
Well, it has to be put in a language they understand. Like 'cause
Yeah.
research can sometimes be incredibly technical, and people don't understand that one benefit for them. And I think you're right. The extension program here in the US is just unbelievable, and it's like so important.
What I was getting at, I think it's been deprioritized a little bit, and I think that should be really at the forefront of every ag-based university's program. That should be their shining star. This is where we put what we discover into action, because why does it matter if you don't? Either you're doing basic research that's helping other people in research do better things, or you building something that people can use. Otherwise, you're just
putting your name on a paper.
And feeling good about yourself. That's not why I'm here.
Yep. And the difficulty in that in that CalCF space too is just measuring success, right? I mean, how people can do something, you tell them it's the right thing to do, but how do they know they got a benefit out of it, right? It's really hard.
Even at the feedlot level.
Yeah.
Even at the feedlot level, when we can sort cattle into pens and have them all the same, measuring a 1-2 pound response, which are legitimate technology responses that we can generate, is very, very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of the day, that you hit the nail on the head. Mm-hmm. My biggest frustration on a day-to-day basis is being able to show something in a controlled scientific environment where I'm controlling all the variables and then saying, I need you to be able to see it when you toss a block out into the field.
Mm-hmm.
And you're counting the only thing you're counting is calves at the end of the season,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And often not measuring the weights individually.
No, you might. I mean, you literally, the only thing most of these folks are measuring is their feed bill and then how many calves get on the truck at the end of the season and the weight of the calves. So a lot of stuff happens in between there that we would love to have an idea on that we will never, have access to. So that's a real challenge as well. And technology is going to be helpful in a lot of that.
Yeah, and we don't know if the calves were heavier this year and we have the ability to measure that. Was it because of the practice we did, or was it because of the environmental
Or
year
did
we
you sell
had?
them a week later?
And it's very
a week earlier.
It's very easy to dismiss it of but I had a week of cold weather.
Yeah.
And it's like it's so easy to have that sort of ability to dismiss the results, even if they're incredibly positive. It was like it was something else.
Absolutely.
Right?
There's nothing greater than seeing your cattle grazing on lush green pasture.
Oh yeah, and nothing ruins that view like weeds and brush soaking up all the moisture and nutrients. Regardless of precipitation, we have to take care of our pastures. It doesn't rain grass.
The passion for cattle ranching starts early. So should the protection. Let's keep our pastures in good hands with Corteva Agriscience. To learn more, visit rangeandpasture.com.
Improved cattle feed rations? Check. Reliable domestic sourcing? Check. Maximizing your return on investment? Check. Whole cottonseed checks all the boxes when it comes to beef cattle diets. As an effective source of fat, fiber, and protein, you can build muscle and increase carcass quality with no adverse effects on animal performance. All hat, all cattle. Want to check some more boxes? Track market prices, find suppliers, and more at wholecottonseed.com.
So leading into innovation, and probably in a different way, but we in our early days were part of the Pierce Lyons Accelerator, and they set up a program for startups, and it was incredibly beneficial for new startups to get in touch with people in industry and understand some of the stuff that's happening in industry. How is Alltech supporting innovation? Those sort of programs have been fantastic in the past, but I've loved that about you as a company. And just interested to know how you're continuing to support innovation and startups and that now.
Yeah, so we've always been that way. I think we've always have our finger on the pulse that way. There's been several programs like that Pierce Lyons Incubator Accelerator, where we actually did internal startups and external startups together, was a really interesting one, where we had people with business ideas from within Alltech go into a startup program with external startups and sort of commingling together. That was a really, really interesting one, which I thought worked well. But really, it's a case by case. If we're doing the same thing over time, we're going backwards is one version of the way Dr. Lyons would say it. The only constant in Alltech has changed. So we're always looking at where we can engage with things. We We just started a ag accelerator program in Kentucky for the first time, supported that. So that is a local government program that we help put together with them. And we're engaging at essentially every level. Whenever we see opportunities that we think are new avenues to engage with young inventors, it's really, really important. It's really important from an innovation standpoint to be engaging with people like that. Because as much as we really focus on having a startup mindset, this is something that's, if you're in R&D at Alltech, you are told to have a startup mindset from day one. You're in a system. Yeah. You have to have a system around you in a company that's the size of Alltech, and that system slows innovation. Mm-hmm. Even when you're being deliberate about not letting it slow innovation, it slows innovation. And this engagement with companies that are coming into agriculture with new ideas, a lot of companies that people think are nuts a lot of the time. That's the way that you keep your finger on that pulse. And it's not just about finding things that you maybe want to integrate or maybe purchase or whatever it might. It's about engaging with that innovation, because that makes us think as well. We might just come up with a completely different idea by engaging with your group. And that has shown to be true by engaging with these types of programs. So not a concise answer, but wherever we can is really the answer to that.
The thing I'd say is, like, you're very welcome to that innovation. And like, for any other startup founders that may listen to the show, or people who have ideas, or producers who want to do a startup, like, do get in touch with you. Like, you guys are very, very open to that and have the ability to help drive some of those business. So, and you know, most people don't even know that exists, right? When you're starting, you're very much on a silo.
And basically our entire research department has now been rebranded as an innovation department. And that's part of all of our job, is to be out there understanding what new things are coming around and how we can engage with them. So we've actively encouraged to talk to people from the outside. So absolutely.
Yeah. What I like about that comment, though, is just the importance of talking to other people in the industry, right? And sometimes we get so siloed, and there's producers who maybe don't have an opportunity to leave their operation for months on end. But if you just try and make an effort to get out and talk to somebody else, because maybe they've heard about some innovation that's really helping them in your exact region, and they've implemented it, and this is the positive outcomes that they're seeing. Get out and visit with people. It's so critical. You learn so much.
Especially scientists.
Yes.
Because scientists want to have tunnel vision.
Yeah.
They want those blinkers, but we need to take them off. If we're like, you chasing your pet dream is not going to help people 9 times out of 10. You know, you might have that one project that ends up changing the industry, but most time people's pet projects don't end up anywhere. Yeah. And you need to have that continuous flow of information, because maybe something someone else has already done is the key to your project's success.
Or will tell you not to go down that path.
Or says, we've done that. That's, don't even waste your money. Exactly. And I think scientists are pretty bad about getting into their own little bubble and just carrying on. And that's something that we're also very deliberate about, saying, let's get our scientists out there and exposed to the real world. Because that's a challenge, I think, in all of R&D, whether it's university or commercial R&D, is that the scientists get isolated from the system that they're trying to study.
Yeah.
And that's just a bad situation from resource standpoint, from efficacy standpoint, whatever it might be.
I agree. Like, we get our software developers out there weighing cattle. Until you do it, they don't know how to do it. And the innovation happens so much quicker when you do that. So no, it's been a pleasure being part of that. And thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Stay tuned. It's time for Ian, Jess, and I to go behind the beef. All right, that was fun. That was my first time meeting Vaughn, but I was impressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate Vaughn, obviously a ruminant nutritionist by training, so I think that he brings a great perspective to everything. My favorite part about Alltech is their systems approach to things, right? And I think that Vaughn really described how critical looking at the ecosystem around a grazing pasture is critical, and how that all flows into ruminant nutrition and feed efficiency and the overall productivity of the beef industry. So really appreciated Vaughn joining us today.
Yeah, it's fascinating to learn how the holistic, basically, approach to research that they're doing. And
and I never got to meet Dr. Pierce Lyons, the original founder, but I've met Mark a few times, and it's just the culture there is very innovation focused. It's very systems focused. It's very passionate about the industry that they're in and like how they can support it. And it's a great company. I mean, there's lots of great people that work there and some incredibly innovative people as well. But I think during the whole cycle, there wasn't many companies that stood up and went, okay, methane's a problem. Let's see what we can do about it. Like a lot of it was just defend. And those guys really did engage. Like they're like, okay, well, how do we actually then engage with the consumer? How do we get the evidence, get the fact base? Like there's a lot of people, there's a few researchers around the world who are doing that, like at UC Davis and stuff. But Alltech was one of the companies that really did lean in to try and tell the story. And, I think it's been very interesting to watch just how they operate as a company, how they open they are to other ideas outside of the beef industry and everything else. So I think, that's why they keep innovating, why they keep growing within the industry.
Well, and how many companies would put out a documentary, that really doesn't necessarily serve them per se, right?
No, not at all, really. Yeah. Like it serves the beef industry in a broader scope, but they're not really there trying to sell product through that documentary.
No, they're just beef industry support and wanting to tell the great story of beef upcyclers, right? Like and for anybody listening, it's a great documentary, World Without Cows. Really appreciate Alltech putting that together.
That was good. And we'll look forward to hopefully having him again next 3 or 4 years when he's got his new innovation that he's after. There's no doubt that he's got his finger on the pulse when it comes to what's happening in the industry.